Hi, my name is Stewart Lynch, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to a host of new modifiers and buttons that were introduced in iOS 15. This is going to be a comprehensive video where we'll look at new button styles, border shapes, control size, and button roles. In addition, we'll introduce you to the new location and toggle buttons, and as a bonus, I'll also throw in a new type of alert called a confirmation dialog. Now, before I get started, I just want to ask that if you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Make sure you ring the bell to be notified of future videos. Comments and likes are always appreciated, and if you support my work, you can buy me a coffee. If this is something you want to learn, then keep watching. I've created a starter project for this video so that when you have completed it, you'll have a nice demo app with some code and views that you can refer back to when you want to introduce these features to your apps. I'll leave a link to the download in the description below. The app starts with this custom tab view setup. Normally, a tab view will only display 5 tabs before you get a More item displayed. What I've done instead here is to incorporate a paging view tab view style and no index displayed, but I've added 6 buttons that'll take me to the selected tab. Each view will have a different tint color, and the current button is disabled as an indication of where you are. You can also swipe back and forth if you want. Each of the tabs is a separate name with the concept being displayed in the title and the tint color as a text field. The location button view also has a map, and we'll get to that when I cover that button type. So let's get started. For all except the location button, we'll work with the view and the preview, though we will eventually test on the simulator to show how the tabbing works and how it looks both in light and dark mode. iOS 15 introduced some new button styles, and I've left comments here to show you what I want to display. Each of these sections will need a button, and though there are many different ways to construct a button in SwiftUI, by far the most flexible, because you're able to choose what kind of label you want to use, is this one. In fact, I use this so much, I want to create a code snippet for this. And more often than not, when I create a button, I'll start like this. So instead of finding that constructor, I'll create my own code snippet. And I can do that by option dragging to select just the text and not the left margin. And then I'll right click and choose Create Code Snippet. I'll give it a name like SwiftUI Button. And then I'm going to replace the string within the quotes with a placeholder. And you do that by enclosing the string in angle brackets and a hashtag. And then for the completion shortcut, I'll just use an acronym of my own choice like BTN, which I'll enter in the completion block. So now, back in my code, to replace this button, all I have to do is type in BTN and then press Enter to create the button. So for each of my sections, I'm going to create one using the same text as my comment. I'll make sure as I go to have that preview continually update. So let's see what these new button styles are like. I'm going to apply a button style here to this first button, and you'll start with .buttonStyle, and then within the parentheses I can use the new iOS 15 way of applying styles by selecting the style by enum. So I'll start with the period and then pick one of the enums available. So for this first one, we'll choose borderless. It doesn't look like anything's changed even after refreshing our preview. So let's try bordered on the second button. And let's apply the corresponding style to each of the remaining buttons. Now you see that borderless is what we've been used to up till now. And plain was there before. It removes all decoration. but bordered adds a nice secondary background to the view, and prominent adds a background using the tint color, and the label text changes to white. Speaking of tint color, we can apply our tint color to a specific button by adding the tint modifier. This view that I want to use will use teal, and teal is one of the new colors introduced in iOS 15. In fact, every color we're going to use in this tutorial is a new color. Teal is just the first one. And we're applying it here to the bordered prominent button style. And we'll see that the background changes to that color. If I want to apply that same tint color to the entire set of buttons, I can do that by applying it to the V-stack. So I'll remove it from the button here and move it to the V-stack. And we'll see that this applies to all buttons now except for that plain button style. Let's see what it all looks like in dark mode. Now the one style that I have ignored is the automatic style, and this is what you get if you apply no style at all. It's the default style based on the button's context. Let's start the same way with our border shapes view. I'll use my snippet to create buttons using our comments as the button labels. Let's apply the border shapes just as we did for border style. We'll start with .buttonBorderShape, and then within the parentheses we'll choose one of the provided enums. For the rounded rectangle with radius, we'll choose 20. Again, we're ignoring the automatic one. Making sure that our preview has been refreshed. Wait, nothing's happened. Well, why? Well, the answer is in the name. These are button border modifiers, and we've not applied a border type button style to any of our buttons. Now we have two choices, either bordered or bordered prominent, as we saw in the last view. And we can apply to each one individually, or we can apply it to the entire V-stack. So let's choose .buttonBorderStyle .bordered prominent on the V-stack. That's better. Let's also apply our new tint color, which is cayenne, to all of our buttons. Nice. Let's check it out in dark mode. Okay, now we're talking. I've applied that bordered prominent button style to all of the buttons. If we want the second one to be just the regular bordered button style, I can do that at the button level. This one applied to the V-stack will only apply to those buttons that have not yet had a button style applied to them. The control size for a button is applied the same way. We can do that either at the V-stack level to apply to all buttons to the V-stack, or a different size for each one individually. Let's create our buttons first with the specified label. Now we can apply a corresponding control size in the same manner. If your canvas is refreshed, it'll be difficult to tell the difference through these views. However, if we apply a button style to each button, we'll see what I mean. So, on the V-stack, I'll apply a button style of just bordered. You can see, though, that the mini and small look identical. Let's check out the documentation. If I option click on each of them, you'll see the difference. The mini control is one that is minimally sized. Okay, that makes sense. The small control, though, is one that might change. It's proportionately smaller for space-constrained views. Let's comment out that control size large for now. And we'll see that it defaults back to the same size as regular. Remember though that if you want all of your controls in a container that have not been assigned a modifier, you can do that at the container level. So we'll apply that control size of large to the VStack. And this then applies now to that one button that did not have that size already. And while we're at it, we'll apply the new indigo tint color. Very nice. How about that dark mode? That's nice too. On now to button roles. Let's start by creating 3 buttons, the first 3 labels of destructive, cancel, and none. To add a role, you can just add a role argument to the button and pass in one of the corresponding enums. So for example, for this first one, we'll set the role to destructive. And you'll see that this turns the label red as an indication that the action is going to be serious or consequential. Let's add one for cancel. Nothing seems to change. For none, we can either enter a role using none, or we can omit the role altogether because that's our default. Up until now, you may be wondering why I don't just use the shortened version of the button, where the label is just entered as a string argument for the button. Well, the reason is that sometimes I like to change the label, and having this constructor is more convenient. For example, I can quickly change this destructive text view to a label. And when I do that, I'm required to also specify a system image. So how about trash? Great, that was easy. So why don't we add a bordered button style to all of our buttons via the VStack? Now I could add a tint here, but as it says, I'm just going to leave it natural without a tint for this tab. So what implications does that cancel role have? Well, it turns out it's quite significant with an alert. So to trigger an alert, I'm going to have a state property. So let's create one, and I'll call it show confirmation, and I'll initialize it as false. So now let's create a new button where the action will toggle this value. So I'm going to change the label from a text view to a label, and for the string I'll choose delete account, and for the system image I'll use $.circle. Let me add a tint of red here for this button only. Now I want to present an alert when show confirmation is true. So attached to this button, let's apply an alert. And we'll want to use the new iOS 15 alert, which has a trailing closure that is a view. So I can use this one here that allows me to enter a string as the title, such as, are you sure you want to delete this account? And I'll bind is presented to our show confirmation state property. Now the trailing closure, I can create 2 buttons because it's a view. One is going to have a label of OK, and the other will say cancel. I'm going to leave the roles out for now, but for the actions, we'll just use a print statement in each that'll represent what our actions are. Now to see the actual print statements, I'll need to run in our simulator. We can see in our tabs that this view is our 4th tab. When I tap on our button, what I see now are 2 cancels and 1 OK. And that last one is bold. And all it does is dismiss the view with no print statements. We only want one, and we want it to be the one that prints our action. So if I return to my view now, I can make sure that we specify the role of one of these buttons to be the cancel button. So guess which one? And also, since deleting an account is a destructive action, let's specify the role for our OK button as destructive. Let's run this once more. And we get what we expect. The cancel action is on the left, and the OK button is on the right, and it's in red because it's destructive. Now, what would happen if I reverse the order of these buttons here within our view? Well, let's see. If we run again, we get the same result. The cancel button is always in the leading position, and the destructive button in the trailing position. Now, one more thing before I move on to our location button. A new kind of alert was introduced in iOS 15, and it's what's called a confirmation dialog. It has almost the same constructor as the alert, so we can change alert to confirmation dialog. I can use the preview here, and I see that the new alert is presented as a sheet up from the bottom, but there is no title as there was in the alert. The cancel button this time is separated from the other button and is presented at the bottom. If you want to get that title back, you'll have to add one more property to the confirmation dialog, and that is called title visibility. And it's an enum, and the default is hidden. But if you want it shown, you can choose visible. Testing once more, we can now see our title. With iOS 15, you can now give your permission to determine your location once and allow an app to access your location only after tapping the new location button. Every time you reopen the app, you'll have to tap the button again, but you won't see the permission alert. The app will only have access to your location when you tap the button. So right now on this tab, I'm presenting a map using MapKit. If I enter the preview mode, I'll see that the map is centered around Waikiki, and that's because I've set my MK coordinate region here around that latitude and longitude. What I want to do is to overlay a new location button at the bottom trailing edge of this map, so that when I tap that button, I want to be able to show my current location on the map. So in order to use this button, I'll first have to import core location UI. So let's set up our overlay first, making sure that we set the alignment to bottom trailing. And now within the trailing closure, I can present a location button. But let me check out the documentation first. It says that this is a button that grants one-time location authorization. Make note of the warning, however. When a user taps the button, it only provides one-time authorization to fetch location data, not the location data itself. Well, that's interesting, and we'll deal with that in a second. To create the location button, we'll simply copy the code from here. I want to add 4 more modifiers, though, to this button. I'm going to set a foreground color of white, a corner radius of 5. I'm going to apply a tint of one of the new colors, and that will be mint, and then set padding all around. When I tap on the button, then, because my map has show user's location set to true, it should set my position on the map once I've granted permission. In order to test this, however, we'll have to run it in a simulator. Now, the first time I do this, I get this alert. And when I confirm, nothing seems to happen for me. And that's because for me, I've not given my simulator a specific location to simulate. And the quickest way to do this is stop running the app and then edit the location for this scheme. And you can see from the product menu scheme, edit scheme, shortcut is just Command less than or Command Shift comma. And in the Run selection under Options, I'll set a default location. And I'm going to choose Honolulu, which is where Waikiki is. If I run this once more in the simulator and tap the button, I'm no longer asked for permission because I've already given that, but I'm zoomed directly into the Waikiki area, and the blue dot shows the current location. Before I go on, however, I'd like to be able to show you one more thing here. If you want to get your current location, you'll need to be able to use the Core Location API. And what this means is that as soon as you grant permission by the click of a button, Core Location will recognize this as an update to your current locations. So I provided a manager class here for this project. This is a standard implementation of Location Manager, and you can use it in your projects. It's been made to conform to Observable Object Protocol. So if we had an instance of this, we could use a published property to be notified of changes, namely the location status, the current location, and that location's coordinates. Now the status is just an enum, so we can convert it into a string. And there are two key functions. The first one here responds to a change of authorization, and we might want to do that. And at the very least, we can update our published property. The second provides us with an array of CL location, of which the last one is our current location. So we can now assign that to our current location published property whenever it changes, and then extract the coordinates as well. So how can we use this then? Well, back in our location button view, let's create a new instance of Location Manager as a state object. Next, in the VStack, I want to create two text views. The first will display the current status of our location connection, and for that, we can use the enum's status string computed property. Below that, we can create another text view to display the current coordinates, but only if it's not nil, which it will be when we first launch. So for our text view then, we can use a text view with your current location and then specify the coordinates latitude and the coordinates longitude. If we run this now, we can see our current status. If I tap the button, however, I am granting permission when in use, and our status field changes. And this also updates the current location and provides us with the coordinates which we can now display. Done. The final type of button I want to cover in this tutorial is a new option for toggle buttons. First, let's start with one of the old standard ones. Now this is going to require a state property, so I'll call mine isOn and I'll initialize it as true. Then let me create a toggle, and we'll bind it to our state property, and in the trailing closure we can create a label. And for that label we'll just use currently a text view, and for that we'll make it conditional based on whether or not isOn is true or false. Let's add some padding to the VStack, and we'll set the tint color to our final new color for tint, which is brown. Now if we enter preview mode, we can test it out. As I flick the switch, our label changes. Now this type of button is by default a type of toggle style, and the default is one that is switch. Well, iOS 15 introduced a new toggle style, and that's of type button. So to demonstrate, let's create a second state property that I'll call isActive, and I'll set it to true initially. So let me create a toggle button once more and bind it to the isActiveState property. But for the label this time, I'm just going to use an image. And it will be a system image depending on the value of isActive. If it is, I'll use the bolt.circle.fill. And if it isn't, I'll use bolt.slash.circle. And then I'm going to set the font to a title size to make that image larger. Well, this still looks like that old style, the switch style, but if I set a toggle style now, I can choose button. And when I preview this, I see that I have a new toggle button in the center of the view. And when I tap it, I alternate between active and inactive, and the image changes. The active state creates a bordered button using our active image as the label, and our tint color is specified for our VStack here. Well, we can enhance this by embedding this entire button in an HStack. And then as the second item in the HStack, make it a text view that's conditional on isActive. So our power is either active or inactive. And let's add another spacer to push this VStack to the leading part of our screen. Let's test all of this now in the simulator. And I'm going to switch back and forth between light and dark mode just to make sure we see how things look. And we can either swipe to move to the next tab or tap on one of the buttons. Well, that's it. I hope that you now have some useful examples of the new iOS 15 button modifiers and new buttons that you'll be able to use in your own code. Thanks for watching.